Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? My name is Jeff, and I'm going to talk to you today about the Harmonious Eightfold Path. Part of the theme for this season is interpersonal and communal harmony. So the Buddha taught us this system for living in harmony called the Eightfold Path. The idea of the Noble Eightfold Path also being seen from a different perspective, the Harmonious Eightfold Path is not that unusual, but I like the teaching that I'll show you guys that I came across as I go through it. So it's all about interacting with ourselves and others in a harmonious way, and really the way that you're practicing day to day, moment to moment, is what the Eightfold Path is all about. And the Harmonious Eightfold Path idea addresses this pretty in depth. So, of course, when we talk about the Eightfold Path, that's the fourth noble truth. So, just going to touch briefly on the Four Noble Truths. But I like to see it as the Buddha's hypothesis. So, it's one of the first, really the first lesson that the Buddha taught after his enlightenment, the Dhamma Chapata, I can't pronounce it, but it's the first turning of the wheel of the Dhamma. So when the Buddha attained his final liberation, he came back and there were 5 ascetics that he had known, and the Buddha had been on kind of a starvation sort of path before he ended up eating a little bit and basically attaining enlightenment. And there's a lot more to that, but the point is that this is the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path are, right out of the gate, the overarching theme that he taught gives an overarching framework of the goals and methods. So really, I like to sum it up, what's the problem? What's the cause of the problem? Is there a solution? And how is it achieved? So that's essentially what it is. It's the Buddha's hypothesis for how to deal with suffering, the extinguishment of it, so to speak. And essentially, he taught that it's your job to walk the path. He can point the way, he can guide, but there's a Pali word, evipasako, which is translated as come and see. So your job is to come and walk the path and see for yourself the Buddha's teachings. Other people can guide you, but the steps are yours to take. It's interesting that once you do start to really walk the path, you can see that there's not really anything to gain. Even deeper meditation states are just byproducts of looking in the right direction and seeing reality more for what it is versus what you thought it was. I like to think of it like seeing your object of meditation and being with it in a way where you're not struggling and straining is just like looking to the north all your life for a mountain and not seeing it. And you keep walking and choosing various paths, looking for the mountain, getting binoculars, telescope, buying maps and talking to people, but never seeing the mountain until you do have a guide that points out the right way. And the mountain wasn't to the north, it's to the south. If you can just turn your awareness and your attention to the object of meditation, to the mountain, you'll see it was there the whole time. Just so with right effort in the path. So the Eightfold Path, the object of meditation, moment to moment, is there with you all the time, undeniable. You don't have to grasp or cling or force or push anything away. It's just there. But we have to learn how to do that. Have to learn how to rest our awareness on the present moment. As Thich Nhat Hanh would say, there's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. So one thing when I started studying Buddhism was that there are so many lists of things. It's interesting because they all basically fit somewhere within the Four Noble Truths. And interestingly, also, the Four Noble Truths kind of fit within each other. It's really all sort of one truth. Because you'll find different ideas in Buddhism that fit, in the first truth and the second truth, they're addressed in the fourth truth. So, there's much more to it, as with many things, but most parts of the Buddhist path can be understood on a surface level at first. And then as you gain some understanding, it becomes clear that you thought you understood, but maybe you didn't. And that most of the Buddha's teachings are interwoven with other parts. So the first noble truth, as you all probably have seen, suffering exists. Second noble truth has a cause. Third noble truth, there can be a relief from suffering. And the fourth, there is a way to the cessation. So back to the first noble truth, what is the problem that the Buddha identified? Seems that no matter what we do, suffering exists. Maybe not at the moment, but inevitably, because of the temporary nature and the three marks of existence, conditioned phenomena are by their nature unsatisfactory, impermanent, and fundamentally impersonal. Eventually, there will be suffering. And so how do you deal with it? That's what the Buddha was teaching. He also taught about the five skandhas, the components that make up the self. So that fits in most in the first noble truth. So basically teaching that these are the components that make up who you are: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. If you look for something more than that, you won't be able to find it. So that was the problem. Buddha says there is a cause to suffering. Cause of suffering is craving and attachment. There's more to it than that, but on a fundamental level, that seems to be true. And he gave the idea of dependent origination, which is an explanation of the origin of suffering. So I'll move on to dependent origination just briefly, but all of these sort of variables have come together to pin you into a round of rebirth and sort of reemergence of suffering. So as you go through the round of rebirth, all of this is a lot, unless you're familiar with it already. But essentially, it's just that the Buddha spelled out, here's how it all happens. Our purpose with Buddhist training is to realize through practice and understand dependent origination and how it applies to the way that things arise in our mind and the way that they can pass away. So I've kind of done what I like to do and simplified a little bit, kind of gray out most of it, because the things that are really pertain to your training and are observable whenever you begin meditation practice in earnest, easy to see clinging and craving. You can, with some training, walk it back to feeling. With a lot of training, you might be able to walk it back to contact itself. But the rest of it, worrying about the larger cycle of rebirth and death, it is important to see, but what you're looking at when you're doing practice is the actual arising and passing away of these factors. So, as your attention and understanding of the hindrances gets better, hindrances being things that pull you away from your ability to see life as it is, things that are just kind of the garbage that's in your mind all the time. But you don't notice it until you stop moving sometimes. But as you get better at understanding, dealing with those, you can see finer and finer things. And that's the point of, at first it's very easy to see clinging and craving. Not really easy to just see feeling without those things. In fact, it takes a lot of training. Even just getting to see that takes some pretty deep concentration. So just a sort of overview and simplification of dependent origination and how it applies to sitting practice as well as practice throughout life. Third noble truth, is there a solution to suffering? The Buddha says yes. Basically by realizing that everything is impersonal, it's possible to experience a state of mind where those things don't arise. And that's all you can really say about it. I don't really feel like it's very helpful to talk more about nirvana. Fourth noble truth. That's the whole point. I've spent 12 minutes getting up to this point. The whole point of this talk is to get to the fourth noble truth so that we can talk about the harmonious eightfold path. Of course, it seems like a lot of tasks. Whenever I first started studying Buddhist practice, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, livelihood, effort, concentration, mindfulness. Seems like all different things you would do. But really, it's all kind of bound up in one. It's everything that you do. There are different things that you do in life, but the Eightfold Path is moment to moment what you should be doing. So I really like part of the Satipatthana Sutta. One component of it that I think is easy to see is, this is from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. It's easy to see that, well, that was during the Buddha's time. Things are different now when we look at this. But the Buddha is saying, bhikkhus, if anyone should develop these 4 foundations of mindfulness in such a way for 7 years, one of 2 fruits could be expected for him, either final liberation here and now, or if there's a trace of clinging left, non-return. And so he kind of elaborates on this, let alone 7 years, bhikkhus, and then goes through it again for 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 7 months, 6 months, down to if anyone should develop these 4 foundations of mindfulness in such a way for 7 days, one of 2 fruits could be expected for him. So, yes, the Buddha was talking to people that probably had really good karma and were born during the time when this was possible, 7 days. But also I think that it's important to practice in the right way. I think that by practicing in the right way, you can actually have relief from suffering and at least see that the Buddha's truth is the way to the relief of suffering within a 7 or 10-day retreat. I know that you can. You can see and understand dependent origination, at least insofar as you can see craving and clinging, how they're forming in your mind, how feeling gives rise to those, maybe seeing things as feeling without the I like it, I don't like it mind. And if you can see those things arise, you've begun to see dependent origination, the origination of your thoughts and suffering. And if you're able to see that, then that's really the crux of the whole thing. You can start to trace it back and get better and better concentration. So I don't think that the 7 days is so crazy, so unheard of. But onto the Harmonious Eightfold Path. This is a teaching that is coming from a book, Life is Meditation, Meditation is Life. It's by Bhante Vimalaramsi. But there are some quotes throughout this, but also just some concepts and ideas. So the first quote I have is, this wonderful path to the cessation of suffering has 8 parts, and they must all be practiced at the same time while the meditator is doing the meditation. So essentially, that's not just when you're sitting, not just during walking meditation, it's when you're going to work, thus the harmonious lifestyle, also called right livelihood. It's when you're, digging a hole to plant a tree, as I did yesterday, or whatever it is. That is the Eightfold Path. That is your practice. So Bhante used the word harmonious to avoid making right and wrong judgments, not black or white, because it softens the sort of a viewpoint. So take people like me that were looking at right view, right thought, right speech, whatever, as a task that I was supposed to be doing, and changing it into really just one flow, one movement. This moment itself, for example, I'm trying to have right speech right now, but that's also right action, because the Buddha said speech was action. Right livelihood, this is what I'm doing to accomplish my goals in life. The Buddha taught those 5 ascetics who didn't have a job, they didn't have a livelihood when he came out of his achievement of final liberation. He taught them about right livelihood. But I wonder if he meant work. That wouldn't really make any sense. He taught lay people and he also taught monastics. So right lifestyle. So as we go through life, the way that we achieve our objectives are our practice. They are our observation. They can be with collectedness, with harmonious movement. All of these factors all together at the same time. So the first one, harmonious perspective, right view. Talking about the perspective of everything that arises as being an impersonal process. And what is our unharmonious perspective? That's viewing things as me, mine, I like it, I don't like it. And as I was saying earlier, craving and clinging cloud your view of reality. So when things are arising, hindrances coming up in your mind, you're sitting in meditation and you have thoughts, I'd like to move my leg, wonder what we're having for lunch, feeling restless and anxious, then those things are just taking you away from your meditation object, which is the moment. But that doesn't mean that they're not reality. So your hindrances are there. What do you do about that? So whenever a hindrance does arise, that's your current situation. You should release it, allow any tension to go away, and come back to the present moment. So there are different processes for that, but pushing it away and trying to suppress hindrances may not be the best way, because they're just going to come back later. But by doing it in a way that's softened, in a way that's accepting, without pushing it, without grasping to a meditation object, then you can begin to see those hindrances fall away on a more permanent basis. So you can see personality change and development in the way that you no longer have those arise as strongly, as much. Harmonious imaging. Imaging meaning the thoughts, feeling, concepts, pictures, and ideas that are in your mind. So there are 4 parts of right effort. You can kind of wrap those up into one expression and just say that the Buddha was teaching with right effort to lessen unwholesome things and make wholesome things stronger. Keep the wholesome stuff, get rid of the unwholesome stuff. So essentially, harmonious imaging is when you're replacing an unwholesome image with a wholesome one. But what is unwholesome? Unwholesome is something like the hindrances that keeps you from seeing reality as it is, seeing this present moment as it is, without being able to really sit with that. And a wholesome one are the things that the Buddha taught. Meditation objects, the breath, taught about the Brahma Viharas, taught about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. These are wholesome objects. A wholesome object could be your hand as you're picking something up. the feeling of it. So it varies, but the important part is knowing whenever you're distracted and moving past that. Basically, you can't control reality right now, but your current choices lead to what the future brings. And that's how change occurs. Another quote with harmonious imaging: letting go of those things that we take personally, then relaxing and substituting them with an uplifting image leads a person to a clear perspective of how mind works. It is being in harmony with the present moment that has no suffering in it. Because suffering is just something that we create by proliferation. In the moment itself, we don't really have suffering until we go back on it and start to really mess with it and say, that's happening to me. I don't like that. Harmonious communication has to do with the gentle communication with ourselves, our internal dialogue, as well as with other people. And I think this is very easy to overlook whenever we're talking about how we're practicing. Gentle communication is something, at least I know I've struggled with. It's very easy to be hard on yourself and hard on other people. It can produce a lot of suffering, but when you really do learn to soften your approach, to laugh at your stupidity in your own mind, then it's kind of like the lubricant for the mental machinery of meditation. So joy itself is one of the enlightenment factors, and I think that it's there primarily for this purpose. It seems anyway that when you're joyful in meditation, that things progress much more deeply, more quickly, more easily, because you stop taking those things seriously when you laugh and when you smile. And what is unharmonious communication? Criticism of ourselves and others, believing that things should be different than how they are. One thing I would note is the Buddha was described as ever smiling. So I'm always in favor of smiling with meditation. Harmonious movement. Seeing the movement of how mind's attention goes from one thing to another is what meditation is all about. Why? Because when meditators train their observation powers, right, mindfulness, they begin to see clearly how mind's attention goes from being on the breath and relaxing to a sound, sight, taste, smell, touch, or thought. This is clearly observing exactly how the movement of mind's attention is seeing the process of dependent origination and how it occurs. I would say for a long time, I meditated without understanding that. I think that right movement is one of those factors that if you can really get good at that, being able to see when and how things are occurring in your mind and when they're coming up and when they're passing away, when you're distracted and moving back to that with right effort, then I think that it's so much easier. It takes a lot of practice because it's not, I think inherently when we sit down to meditate, I don't think that we initially had the idea that we are going to relax and have a good time. Sometimes we don't have the idea that we're going to just let things go because we're taking it very seriously. But truly, meditation practice should be or can be rejuvenating and wonderful and easy, and something that is not difficult at all. Unharmonious movement, as you would guess, trying to control your thoughts, trying to control your experience rather than accepting it. And sometimes when you look at right movement, it seems like that is similar to the Earth's tectonic plates. I always had this feeling like, you know, you have your meditation object that you're trying to hold on to. You have your hindrance that comes up and they're pushing, they come into contact with each other. You're holding on to one of them or pushing one of them away. And it eventually can create an earthquake where it blossoms into movement. You become frustrated and your heart rate increases, or you end up moving your leg, that type of thing. So just kind of an interesting thought. If you can take the energy out of that pushing, then a lot of times when you move back to your meditation object, there's no earthquake anymore. There's no pressure, no tension. Harmonious lifestyle. As I was kind of talking earlier, the Buddha did teach definitely some things you should not do for a living, things that are harmful. But he also taught this to monastics, so I don't think there was much risk of monks and nuns having slaves or selling poison. Maybe there was, but doesn't seem to me. But I think it's more of a general thing. As with so many things in Buddhism, it doesn't just mean one thing, it can be interpreted in different ways. So what Bhante said on this one is harmonious lifestyle, right livelihood, means how we practice our observation and meditation of the present moment during all the times that we are not doing our sitting meditation. So move on to harmonious practice. When a person recognizes the mind's attention has become distracted by a thought, feeling, or sensation, this is the first part of harmonious practice. Next, the meditator lets go of the distraction and relaxes the tension or tightness in both mind or body. So this part is all about not fighting with the hindrances. Getting involved with them tends to just give them energy. It's not allowing them to just run all over your mind, but as you can begin to understand how they're interacting with your mind, and if you can see for yourself through some sitting practice, and maybe you're able to do it with walking practice, that when you don't give energy to those hindrances, they will pass away on them. And that's the point of sitting through those things whenever there are impulses that come up, part of the point. You can suppress them for a short time with concentration, and some teachers do teach to do that. But whenever you stop meditating, they'll pop back up. So I don't know that the Buddha was teaching temporary relief from symptoms. It seems like he was teaching something permanent. This way it does lead to permanent change. Harmonious observation. Mindfulness, I feel like, is often poorly defined. Is it paying really close attention to stuff? Is it remembering or remembering to remember? I don't know what that means, but I've seen it defined in a lot of different ways. There are at least a couple of definitions in this book that make sense to me. To remember to recognize any distraction that pulls one's attention away from their meditation object or whatever you're doing in the present moment. And it can also be defined as remembering to clearly observe how mind's attention moves from one thing to another. Eventually, when you do get into some deep meditation, it means seeing how the links of dependent origination arise and pass away, but that's some heavy stuff. And it is possible. It is, as I was describing earlier, but it's not easy. But really, it's just seeing as the mind moves from one thing to another, paying attention to that. Harmonious collectedness. I think, there are different definitions of this one. Bhante in the book has a sort of different view of it. So he says that in the suttas, serenity and insight are almost always mentioned together when the Buddha talks about the different types of meditation. He says that sometimes you don't have to, sometimes teachers separate the two out, but you don't have to. The style of meditation that he teaches is kind of has them bound up together, and that's part of why he says that. But when used correctly, the meditation is immediately effective, can help you to see the things that we were talking about. And when you're deeply concentrated, it's easier to observe without having any or little craving come up. But everyone is different, and the type of meditation that you find best and the meditation object that you find most helpful will depend on you. So in summary, basically just remember that what you do arises with what you do with what arises in the present moment dictates what happens in the future. Make sure not to fight with your hindrances, and try your best to follow the harmonious Eightfold path. That's all I have. Thank you.